Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. It's time for the Aki tier list recap, which means taking a good look at all the extreme records we saw this past Basho. In fact, those records are the reason this got delayed. I went mega nerd on how scheduling's been done recently, and if that had anything to do with these records turning out the way they did. And yeah, it looks like that might have had an effect. I still have to sort out some of the details I found, so that's gonna be its own video. For now, let's start venting. I want to start positive so we can at least point to the top of the tier list being exactly as expected or better. I managed to underrate Onosato and Wakataka Kage at A tier, which I'm not surprised that Onosato stonked out, but Waka hitting 12 wins was definitely not on the bingo card. Takayasu was maximum Papa Bear, hurting his back against Onokatsu and not recovering in time to put up a fight against Nishikigi. He was healthy for the rest of the tournament through day 12 though, so of course he ran it to 10-2 before the schedule ramped up, his back acted up again, and the last 3 days turned into a washout. I'm not saying he'd have gone 12-0 if not for the flare-up, because his schedule would have amped up at day 10 instead of day 12, and maybe then he ends up with the same record. But that's life in sumo when your body is held together with duct tape and prayers. If the glue loosens or the spirits fall asleep, you just gotta do what you can for a while. Koto Zakura and Hoshoryu's injury tier rankings were equally well earned because they both got winning records despite obviously having matches where things weren't right. You know I'm all about pinky life, but Koto doesn't get drilled out like this by Ura if he's fighting fit. And I'm pretty sure I've never seen Hoshoryu try so few big throws in a tournament. Up till now, he tried kick-flipping guys harder than Tony Hawk so often opponents started focusing on throw defense, but this time he mostly went straight in and only hit a real nephew throw on Wakamoto Haru. Maybe in the long run this gets him in a state of mind to win with a more direct approach and find greater consistency. Or maybe he goes back to the old ways as soon as he stops feeling like his legs got stretched out on the rack. B tier, however, was a f***ing disaster. Onokatsu looked hopeless at first, but once we got a better look at him, it became apparent who he could beat and who he couldn't. Problem is, he looked like a boy competing against men, and the number of guys he could beat was a hell of a lot smaller than I expected. Shirokuma wasn't doing any better before he got hurt, and even though he looked potentially more dangerous because he's better at running in and hitting dudes, he still gets it turned around on him too much. Onokatsu's at least got the defensive game to deal with that, as long as he's not fighting the half of the division that can currently overpower him. Someone get that man a lifting coach. Gonoyama, good f***ing god. Gonoyama's either forgotten what works for him or gone so all in on it that he's too predictable for this level of the sport. Now, those sound like completely opposite things, and yet it's really hard to tell which is true. Is he doing the same thing worse than before, or has everyone figured out his timing? 6 of his 9 losses were from some version of getting slapped down, which is the thing you're supposed to learn to avoid at this level. Yorikiri and Oshidashi, the most straightforward ways of winning, are also by far the 2 most common ways of winning. And yet, he's gotten thrown or slapped down more than he's lost by those 2 methods combined. Even the most notorious pushers in the sport don't suffer from that problem or anything close to it. At some point, the guy has to figure this out, doesn't he? But if he hasn't done it yet, when the hell is it gonna happen? Now Hiradeumi, this poor bastard. I can't justify saying B tier was correct because he didn't finish with a winning record, but he only fell 1 win short with an absolutely blistering schedule. He starts 6-4, only losing to the 2 Ozeki, Onosato, and Daisho, who beats his ass with regularity. This is pretty much as expected. When they schedule for day 12, they need Sanyaku guys to test the Maegashira contenders. Hiradeumi's got a winning record, so he's up and gets Takayasu. When they schedule day 13, he's 6-5 because of a pretty stunning loss to Atami Fuji, but it's still a winning record, so he gets Nishikigi. Then, when he's 6-6 after losing to Takayasu, they don't need him to test anyone, but the next guy in line for him to fight is Shodai, who looks better than he has in ages. By the time he got to Mitakayumi on day 15, he was 6-8 and the losing record was in the bag. But across 15 days, his opponents finished with a combined record of 125 and 100. That's almost a full win above the average per guy. The only Rikishi whose opponents had more wins was Daisho, who looked pretty good after a tough start and still only finished 8-7. Komusubi life is rough. Clarence will be back. The injury tier guys were only marginally more accurate. Takakeisha walked out of the sport after 2 days, but the only surprise there was how quick it was. Hokuto Fuji actually went out for a couple of days because of his knee and still somehow pulled together a winning record, which I don't know how to take that. Is he still likely to do worse in general because of the knee, or was that a one-off issue and he's mostly getting better? I have no idea. Kirishima came back in a weirdly big way. It's rare for a guy to still clearly struggle with lingering issues like he did in July, then stomp the balls off everyone 2 months later. I hoped he'd turn into this guy again, but I don't think anyone had reason to think it would happen so soon. The new question is if he can look this good in November, whether or not it leads to another 12 wins. Wakamoto Haru continues to confound expectations, but we might view him as the flip side of Hiroto. The final combined record of his opponents was 101 and 109. No disrespect to Waka, because he looked healthy and got the job done, but having a crazy good record like 11-4 is a lot easier when you fight almost the entire Sanyaku and your opposition still can't combine for a winning record. The one Sanyaku guy he dodged was Kirishima. How? Outside of his wins against Kotozakura and Daisho, he never faced anyone who posed much of a threat. He's gonna taste the Komusubi life again in November, so we'll get a better look at where he's at then. Kinbozan, I'm not even gonna roast him. I just feel bad for him. He's not okay. Someone figure out what's going on and get him some real treatment. For obvious reasons, more picks end up somewhere in C tier than anywhere else, so some of them are gonna be wrong. But I don't think we've ever had so many get bumped above C tier post Basho. Oshoma's July was a little rough, but he still seemed completely capable of a winning record. 10 wins though was not expected. He hit that nice middle ground of doing really well, but not so well that he got dragged up to face the Sanyaku, and fighting Kitanawaka and Bushozan the last 2 days just let him gorge himself on soft food. Shurinoumi had an excellent win against Wakataka Kage the first day, then didn't face anyone who finished with more than 8 wins until his loss to Oshoma on day 8. After that, he won his other challenging matchup on paper against Nishikigi on the last day. I don't want to denigrate the effort, but it's also quite possible Nishikigi wasn't super keen on the kind of rank jump he'd get with 12 wins. The way he looked this tournament is not likely the way he'd look getting slapped up by the Sanyaku again. I'm not saying he threw it, I'm just saying he didn't have a lot of motivation to really work his ass off. Now Chura's gonna taste the joy. And Shodai. I mean, play back what I said last time. It would be the most Shodai thing in the world to go 11-4 and make it back to the Sanyaku, but come on. He was one grumpy Oho away from doing the exact thing I said he might do. Let's not all climb back on the Zen Shodai train yet though. He looked pretty good, but we didn't get to see him look that way against a bunch of guys fighting well. He pulled 10 wins against opposition that combined for a 108 and 117 record. More to the point, the schedule lined up to gift him Abi, Meisei, Gonoyama, Tobizaru, Takanosho, and Hiroto in the 6 days after he dropped to 4-4. On paper, they're not a string of gimme wins, but the way they performed in September, they were just chew toys for the dog almost nobody thought Shodai had in it. The last Komusubi slot for Kyushu is between him and Oho, but I think it's gonna be him. If he's actually back and functioning close to the level that saw him reach Ozeki, November is what's gonna show us. It would be a hell of a story, but I have my doubts. The flip side of the excellent work from Wakabro, Shodai, etc. is a lot of the guys responsible for these inflated records. I didn't expect much out of Takanosho, Kageyaki was only C- instead of D because he occasionally looked competent, and Shoninoumi should be better, but he still hasn't put it all together yet. But those three were so bad, if they were baseball players, they'd spend a month in AAA before getting called back up. Kageyaki might never see the light of the majors again. Takanosho was at least fighting the toughest competition, and we knew he usually struggles at those heights, but the only time Shoninoumi completely failed at this rank was when the flu went around in January. I don't know of any excuse this time. He didn't overcommit like Gonoyama, he didn't really do anything differently, he just did everything worse. Kageyaki beat better guys in July than he lost to in September. It's kinda sad that Maegashira 11 is flying too close to the sun, but I wouldn't be surprised if he forgot what the sun felt like after digging through the Juryo pits for so long. Tobizaru and Meisei, on the other hand, I expected more out of them. I did mention some time ago that when you've got injuries like Meisei, the wheels can come off at any moment, and that's what we might have seen this time. But I don't remember the last time I saw Tobizaru with so little spark, or if I've ever seen that. He still looked active, but that's not difficult when you're faster standing still than some of these guys are sprinting. He just looked a step behind his normal self, which is a pretty big problem when that step is how he wins. If it was an issue of fighting the toughest guys right away and never getting on track, that might lead to a strong November at a lower rank. If he's actually losing a step though, I don't want to think about where that leaves him. Thankfully, we did get a lot of the C tier picks right. Ura was even better than expected at Maegashira 5, shrugging at a schedule that got ramped up by Takakeisho's early exit and beating 3 out of 4 Sanyaku opponents, including both Ozeki. 4 of his 6 losses were to guys who finished with 10 or more wins, and Matakayumi was the only match he dropped where he should have been expected to win. But Matakayumi's gotta beat someone, right? Daisho remained his usual steady self with a schedule difficult enough that these 8 and 7s remained something less than a guarantee. Endo's renaissance ended in a hurry when those magically rejuvenated knees that carried him through May and July stopped doing their job halfway through September. Fortunately, he only needed one more win for his Kachikoshi and made it happen. Tamawashi, Roga, and Sadanoumi were all rank neighbors who lost on the last day, but they all finished with 7 or 8 wins. The veterans remain as steady as ever, and Roga looks like he'll hold his own for a while. The C- picks were slightly worse, as they should be. Atami Fuji continues to befuddle Hoshoryu and scored a surprisingly dominant win over Hirodoumi, but still could only spin that into another 7 and 8 record. At least he'll finally move out of Maegashira 1 and 2, so he can probably keep flailing helplessly at Maegashira 3. Midori Fuji still needs to find a new trick to get back to winning regularly at these mid-ranks, but the only trick that looks like it'll work at this point is putting on about 3 inches and 50 pounds. Koto Shoho suffered some type of leg injury towards the end, but still came surprisingly close to a winning record considering his rank. He's getting more legit if his body holds together, aka the eternal motto of sumo. And Ichi Yamamoto and Nishiki Fuji were so close, they fought a Darwin match on day 15. I don't know if it's more or less fair that Nishiki Fuji got saved from demotion after July, since he did manage a winning record here, but I still see a long-term yo-yo ride in his future. As for the injury picks, Abi was definitely not okay. We know he's not a guaranteed winner at Sekiwake, and he's also not a D-tier wrestler even at this rank, so that sorts itself out. And Ryuden finished 8 and 7. Yay for him. And then we get to D-tier, the planned suck, the expected circus, a billing which 60% of them lived up to. Matakayumi is not going to pull a Shodai anytime soon, so Matakayumi fans are hopefully happy he's going back to a rank where he should be somewhat competitive. This should also apply to Bushozan and Kitanowaka, but it's pretty likely one of them will hang on to the ass end of the division and earn another D-tier record in November. I would say that maybe I cursed Bushozan by giving him credit for a strong performance early in the Basho, but it's not a jinx if he's actually that bad. Kitanowaka at least managed enough wins to not break the lifetime futility record, so congratulations to him? Oh-ho, hey, I'll take my lumps here. He's been getting better, but it's mostly been in how hard he fights. He's still had trouble figuring out how to actually beat stronger competition, but this time he really leveled up his game. He used actual tactics and looked like he went in knowing what he wanted to accomplish rather than hit and give up like the old Oho used to do, or hit and then just struggle really hard like the newer Oho started to do. Koto Sakura and Hoshoryu being injured helped a bit, but he's been trouble for Hoshoryu regardless, and all but one loss was to strong competition. Maybe he's on the verge of becoming known as more than Takakeisho's last fight. But Takara Fuji? What the hell? Listen, I want nothing but the best for Ryuden's nemesis, but where in the pissing hell did this performance come from? Sure, he was at the bottom of the division, and he's somehow still never beaten Kinbozan. But he's the reason Nishikigi was only a fringe contender for the Yusho, he took it to Oshoma, made Onokatsu look absolutely hopeless, and gave us a look at why we might not want to hold out much hope for Shishi's ascension to Makauchi. He keeps doing the same thing against mainly the same guys, but for some reason now it's working as often as not. I'm happy for him, but he's never leaving C tier again. And that is the recap for Aki 2024. Like I said, there's been some intriguing changes to how they schedule matches, so I'm working on a video about that. The only promise I can make though is that it's gonna be incredibly nerdy. Also, we've got some preview art for the new Sumo Kittens merch. It's just sketches right now, so those are in a community post you can find linked in the description. Other than that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.